The President of Indonesia was the chief guest at the Republic Day functions of 2025. And in this video deck, we're going to explore the old connects between India or Bharat and Indonesia. Some of the things that we are going to find today will really surprise you as to how much the influence of Buddhism and Hinduism, as well as the script used, have been on the Java Dvipa, which is the name given in the olden days for Indonesia. Java, my limited knowledge of Sanskrit, Java, Dvipa means islands, and Java means as many or several or forever. Forever islands is probably one way to look at it. Java Dvipa means there were so many islands that they perhaps thought that this area should be called as Java Dvipa. So that was the old name given for, or the Sanskrit name given for Indonesia. It is believed that Indonesia converted to Islam in the 11th century, although some people say it might have been a little bit earlier than that, but be that as it may, that is around the time when the Islam invaded or pervaded into Indonesia. Although what we find here is a very moderate form of Islam, not the one that you find in for example, South Asia, especially in countries like Pakistan. So, small slide deck here to talk about what has been happening between Indonesia and India, because now Indonesia is buying BrahMos missiles from India, and one wonders for what purpose or to defend against whom that they are getting these missiles. Certainly, Op Sindoor has helped. I was going to do this slide deck a little bit earlier, but then I somehow forgot about it because I was doing this series on Angkor Wat. In fact, you are seeing a time-lapse photography of the Angkor Wat temple in my backdrop, and I thought, okay, well, it's time now to go back and look at the connects between India or Bharat and Indonesia. Here we go. President Prabowo Subianto emphasized the deep historical and cultural connects between Indonesia and Bharat, and this was during a banquet that was hosted by President Draupadi Murmu. He also said that the Indian DNA was something that was very, very prevalent in his recent genetic test that he had performed upon himself. Now, he also said that when he listens to Indian music, he feels like dancing. And he also highlighted the role of Sanskrit in shaping Indonesian language, because I'm going to show you a timeline as to how this Indonesian language was derived from Brahmi, and it itself was used to come to an intermediate language called Pallava script. And what is Pallava script and how it shaped the local scripts such as Telugu, Kannada, Tamil, and so on and so forth. We're going to talk about all that also. The interesting thing about Indonesia, and I have many friends in the United States who are from Indonesia, all of their names have a lot of Sanskrit in them. In fact, you can break down the name to understand where they are coming from. I have one of my friends whose name is Uttama Sri. And Uttama is, of course, Purushottam, best of all. Sri is name given in respect. I think his name is a little bit longer, but for all practical purposes, that's how he used to call himself. Another one I have whose last name is Bharata di Raja, which means, of course, the brother of the king. And I used to always joke with him, hey, where is your kingdom? And he used to laugh it off. So these are all, it's little things, but what little I have known about Indonesia and their culture, it's very, very rooted in Hinduism. The ancient and long history shared between these two countries is what I'm going to be looking at today. And what exactly are the different places where you can see the interconnect? Before we do that, let's take a quick look at the population demography of Indonesia. Indonesia is 87% Islam, Christianity is about 10%, and Hinduism is 1.7%, Buddhism is 0.7%, and Confucianism and other traditional religions is 0.3%. In fact, the Christianity would have been higher if East Timor had continued to be part of Indonesia. That has been separated out now, and that's a Catholic island now. So this is what happens when conversion takes root. And then this is an interesting case where a Hindu country became Islamic, and then that Islamic country got a part of it carved out as a Christian nation. So then when my good friend Ankit Shah says that Iran will become Christian, I mean, these are all possibilities. It is definitely possible. It's how much who is working on the changing the mindset at the very low level and how successful they are. That's what makes it. Now, the 1.7% of the Indonesian population, much of that lives in Bali, where over 83% of the population is Hindu. In fact, Bali has a very interesting temple called the Prambanan temple. Prambanan is actually temple for Parabrahma. You won't find a lot of temples for Parabrahma. There is one in India too, at Padanila Parabrahma temple near Alappuzha in Kerala. And that's the only thing that I could find out about the temple for Parabrahma. Remember, Parabrahma is the single God in Sanatana Dharma. He's got no shape. It's also called Nirguna Swarupa. And that's how this idols, deities, murtis, all these things evolved, because while the rishis understood what Parabrahma was, the common man had difficulty comprehending a shapeless, formless God, which is why we have all these murtis. This I've said in many other videos, so you know what I'm talking about. Other places where you'll find Hindus are Sumatra, Kalimantan and Lombok Islands. Balinese Hinduism is distinct, blending elements of the local traditions with Hindu beliefs brought over from India centuries ago. How far back does it go? I'm going to come to that in just a second. Rituals, ceremonies, and temple architecture in Bali reflect a unique fusion of Hinduism and indigenous animistic practices. India's cultural influence goes back close to 2000 years ago. Hinduism and Buddhism were introduced to Indonesia by Indian traders and scholars during the 1st century Common Era. 3rd century before Common Era, Ashoka had sent some Buddhist monks to spread Buddhism in the Southeast Asia. It is possible that some of it spread then, but after that, around 1st century CE, there was another effort to spread Buddhism, and the ancient Indians spent Hinduism as well as many other aspects of Indian culture, including Sanskrit and the Brahmi script. The trace of Indian influences is evident predominantly in the way the scripts are written. In fact, we're going to look at how the Indonesian script is believed to have been derived, that in the upcoming slides. The ancient Indonesian kingdoms such as Srivijaya, which is Sumatra, and Majapahit, which is Java, were deeply influenced by Indian culture. These kingdoms adopted Hindu and Buddhist practices, as evidenced by the magnificent monuments such as the Prambanan temples, which is the Parabrahma temple that I talked about, and Borobudur, or the Buddhist temple. Indian epics like the Ramayana and Mahabharata get enacted in Indonesia even now, and I'm going to show you some pictures of that. And these are also performed as shadow puppet plays called Wayang Kulit and traditional dances. Here you see Ramayana being played or enacted in Bali, and here you have Legong Mahabharata. And Indonesia entered its historical period after the adoption of the Pallava script and Sanskrit language from India, as evidenced in some of the earliest inscriptions dated from Indonesia's oldest kingdoms, such as the Yupa of Kutai, Tugu of Tarumanagara, and historical records of Kalinga. Hindu deities such as Vishnu, Shiva, and Brahma have been integrated into Indonesian art, literature, and temple architecture. Remember that the airline of Indonesia is Garuda, and Hindu-Buddhist kingdoms such as Srivijaya, Medang, Sunda, and Majapahit were the predominant governments in Indonesia. The Pallava script, let's come to that, and how is this the originator of what also became the foundation for the Indonesian script. The Pallava script is an ancient writing system that originated in southern India during the Pallava dynasty, approximately between the 3rd and 5th century CE, Common Era. It is derived from the Brahmi script and is characterized by its ornate and angular letters. You can see here the script, and in fact this is very, very reminiscent of what you can find in the Brihadishvara temple in Tanjore in the 10th century CE. The script played a significant role in the cultural exchange between India and regions like Indonesia, where it was used for inscriptions in Sanskrit. The Pallava script influenced the development of other language scripts such as in Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, and Khmer. The script is also known as Pallava Grantha. It also has the name of Tamil Brahmi also. So the question about which is the oldest language, like for example, we say, right, that Tamil is one of the oldest languages. It even predates Sanskrit. So this is where the dichotomy comes. So if the spoken language was there from before that, then you can also make the argument that Sanskrit is nothing but Prakrit, but it is refined in terms of grammar. But Sanskrit existed as Prakrit before 597 BCE, which is when Panini is supposed to have formalized it and made it as Sanskrit. And how far back does that go? 10,000 years? 20,000 years? No one really knows. So the question about which is older, Tamil or Sanskrit, a lot of research still needs to be done before one can arrive at a definitive conclusion of which predates the other. The mother temple of Vaisakhi is another example of Hindu architecture, and you can see here this is the Pusey Batuan temple. And now we look at how the Indonesian script itself evolved. Sanskrit has had a profound impact in the Indonesian language. Many words in Bahasa Indonesia, that is the current version or the national language of Indonesia, are derived from Sanskrit, especially in fields like politics, religion and philosophy. Examples are Agama, which is religion, from Sanskrit Agama, Raja, king, from Sanskrit Rajan, and Negara, state, from Sanskrit Nagara. Many Indonesian names and titles have Sanskrit origins, reflecting the historical connection. Names like Ganesha and Devi are very common. Titles like Sri, used to denote respect, reverence, originate from Sanskrit. Traditional ceremonies and rituals in Indonesia, especially in Bali, incorporate Sanskrit mantras and practices. Temples in Bali often bear inscriptions and carvings in Sanskrit, showcasing their integration into regular life. Here are some of the inscriptions in Sanskrit. So there is the Devanagari also there, and you also see the Tamil Brahmi or Pallava script used. Here is the heritage of a traditional attire. This is how the traditional attire of Indonesia is. In fact, if you travel Singapore Airlines, you will find a lot of similarities between the dresses used there as well as here. Remember, Malaysia was also a Hindu kingdom. It is believed that one of the rulers had a concubine from Arabia who herself was Islam, and she forced him to convert to Islam, and that's how Malaysia became Islamic. So these are all stories. We have to still do a little bit more research on exactly when this thing happened, and we'll at least know that this is how these things change from one religion to another. The maritime boundary between India and Indonesia is at least 300 nautical miles, especially at the farthest point of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands to the westmost point of Indonesia. The distance is a mere 80 nautical miles. And that is where you call the Malacca Strait and everything exists. Nicobar Islands, I think this is called Point Indra or Indra Point or something like that. That is the point that is the southernmost. And from that point to Indonesia, Sumatra Island is a mere 90 kilometers. So that you can tell that if India and Indonesia wants to police the Malaccan Straits, they can easily do so. The presence of Hindu cultural practices in Indonesia enhances India's soft power in the region, showcasing a shared heritage that transcends religion and geography. Indonesia's Hindu population, its deep-rooted historical connections with India underscore a unique cultural symbiosis that has stood the test of time. Viewers, this is the amazing part. I go through so many of the Southeast Asian nations, starting from Myanmar. Myanmar is essentially Brahma Desa. Brahma Desa became Burma, and Burma went on to become, now they call it Myanmar. But it is essentially Sanskrit word Brahmadesa. And then all the other kingdoms beyond that, Thailand, Cambodia was called Kambuja Desa, Vietnam was called Champa, and I don't remember the Thai name. There are names for Thai, Laos and other kingdoms also that existed in these places. All of this was Hinduism, and to some extent it went back and forth between Hinduism and Buddhism. And I think it's time that we helped and discovered our ancient links that existed between all these countries and Bharat. Thanks for watching. Please like, share and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to click on the bell button for notifications. Namaskar.